Hey there, environmental science students. It's Mr. Johnson here with set 4 of our bird identification videos. This video will go over 5 birds, numbers 18 through 22. I'll remind you that you should have written down your first impressions of all of these birds. As I go through them, don't forget to write down, or I guess type out, the key identifying characteristics that I give you, and to go back and write down how you will remember each bird. Because you will be seeing different pictures of these on your test. So let's get started with number 18, the mourning dove. So the mourning dove, notice how it's not mourning as in good morning, it's mourning as in sadness. So the mourning dove gets its name because of its call. And I can play that call right away as long as we're on that topic. Here's what it sounds like. This is a call I think that a lot of people have heard at some point. It's sort of a sad, mournful song. The nice thing about knowing some of these calls is if we know what the call is, then we know what to look for, and it's a lot easier to identify those birds on first glance. I also kind of like it because when I'm walking around, if I hear a call, like even if I don't see the bird, I can picture what is around me during that walk. So that's kind of nice. Okay, so the mourning dove. Let's break this down. If we look at this, it's sort of an overall tan colored bird with some kind of spots and speckles on its back. It's got this long kind of skinny neck and a tiny little head with a huge eye. If you looked at this and thought it looked a lot like a pigeon, you're right. The mourning dove is related to the regular pigeon, which is now called a rock pigeon, but the regular pigeon that you think of used to be called a rock dove, and so they've just recently changed that. But they are in fact pretty closely related. A few other subtle points about this is we see a little bit of kind of a white eye ring around that eye. This bird, its color has a function. This bird will nest in kind of pebbly, gravelly, sandy areas. Sometimes if you've ever driven on a dirt road or, like a gravel road, you may have seen a couple sort of tan looking birds fly away from you. Well, you're seeing mourning doves. And so this kind of speckled back helps break up its appearance so that it can nest safely in those conditions. Next up, the northern flicker. If we take a look at this northern flicker, it has several characteristics that make it a woodpecker. So we can look at those stiff tail feathers. We can look at this long pointed beak. And the thing there's many things that set this apart from the other woodpeckers, but this bird tends to be about the size of a robin, just maybe a little bit bigger, but not by much. If you happen to catch a glance at its breast and belly, you'll notice kind of this kind of triangle shape on its breast and kind of this cool white breast and belly with spots on it, black spots. Otherwise, it's sort of like a tan gray back with some striping on it, some black striping. And we see a prominent mustache here. That mustache actually will tell us what kind of morph the bird is. And by morph, what I'm really talking about is 2 different color variations. There's a red shafted northern flicker and a yellow shafted northern flicker. And this picture here really well, it shows the shafts of the feathers are yellow. So that's a yellow shafted northern flicker, and it's the one with the black mustache. Here we have a red mustache, and so if we were to actually see this bird fly, where we see yellow here, this bird over on the left would actually have red shafts showing on that bird. The northern flicker is one of the few woodpeckers that I'll regularly see on the ground or near the ground. And when it flashes sort of a bright white patch just above its tail, kind of at the lower back of that bird. So that would be the northern flicker. Again, pretty common bird, but since people see it fly from the ground often, they don't necessarily think it's a northern flicker. Moving on to the swallows. There are a whole bunch of swallows. We're going to go over the 2 most common swallows. If we think of the bird as being, having different tools, wings are a tool just like a beak is. There are obviously different tools for different jobs, but this bird is really compact. It has these really tight aerodynamic wings that make it very good, tiny little fighter pilot. And so this bird is able to twist and turn its body and make really sharp turns mid-air. The reason it's doing that is it's catching insects in mid-flight and eating them. The beak is a lot flatter and wider. So you can't really see too well in this picture, but you can see at least that it's a lot flatter of a beak, but it's really wide across its face. And that makes it really good at catching insects in the air. This is one of the birds. If you've ever seen people mowing a big soccer field or football field, if you see a whole bunch of birds flying really low to the ground, making incredibly tight turns, you're looking at some sort of swallow, and it is catching the insects that are being stirred up by the lawnmower that's going over that field. The cliff swallow is one of the birds that will make these kind of big mud huts. The barn swallow will too. Basically, anytime you see a mud hut like this up underneath a bridge or maybe underneath the eave of your house, that's some type of swallow. If we look at this cliff swallow, we see that it's kind of got this dark, maybe bluish body. It's pretty much dark, kind of dark gray. And we see a white breast and belly, and that white extends up over the back of its neck. It's got a little white on its forehead and a rust color sort of chin. Let's compare that to our next swallow. This swallow here is the barn swallow. It's got similar features, really tight, compact wings that help it be a tiny little insect-eating machine, turning quickly to catch those. And you can see that it's got that kind of bluish, dark bluish body. I think this is really brightly lit by the sun. But you'll notice that it doesn't have that white go across the back of its neck, and it doesn't have that white on its forehead. There's one other thing that will help us tell the barn swallow from the cliff swallow. Because these birds fly so fast that I usually can't see little things like, oh, it had a little bit of white on the back of its neck, or it didn't. Instead, what I'll look for is I'll look for this tail. And so that tail, if you'll see that we have really long forked tails. And so the long forked tail is going to be the barn swallow. And kind of a way you can remember that, if we look up at the N in barn, you'll notice how the N in barn is sort of that long forked look, just like the tail of the barn swallow. If we go back to the cliff swallow, its tail more or less comes to an abrupt edge, like a cliff might. You're walking up to a cliff, comes to an abrupt, end, and that might help you remember those two. I don't know, it might be a little cheesy, but it might be helpful too. And so what I do is I will see these swallows, both the barn swallow and the cliff swallow, flying around in big flocks together, because maybe I went underneath them on my underneath a bridge on a bike trail and scared up a bunch of these birds, and they're flying around. If I can catch a glimpse of this forked tail, I know it's a barn swallow. And our last bird in this video is going to be the red-winged blackbird. This is one of the few birds that you are allowed to call a blackbird if you call it the correct kind of blackbird. This red-winged blackbird, it's really obvious. It gets its name from this shoulder, this red shoulder. But don't be confused, because that red wing, that red part of the wing, this bird can cover that up. So it can take feathers, and it can sort of cover up or hide that red. If it's showing the red, then it's being territorial and aggressive to other birds. It's sitting out there claiming its territory. And its territory, usually, if you look at what it's sitting on cattails, kind of those things that look like hot dogs on a stick sitting out in kind of a wetland, marshy area. Well, that's where these birds mainly live. And again, you can see these birds with bright red wings singing their call or singing their song, trying to attract a mate and declare their territory. Or if they're trying to play nice, they can cover that red up. You'll see a little bit of band of this yellow, and that's basically a sign that, hey, I'm just here to eat. We can get along, not territorial at all. A sound that you'll hear this bird make is pretty common also. It's sort of like an okali or a conkali sound, and we can hear it now. So usually when I hear that call, it is somewhere near water, because this bird, again, usually will sit and make that call when it's trying to find a mate or declare its territory. That'll be our last bird for this video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next set.